A lot of women have been called a crazy ex-girlfriend, but Brenda DelGado actually was one. Brenda met a successful young doctor and fell in love. That love quickly turned into obsession. Unfortunately, the pair wouldn't last. Before long, she would begin stalking him and his new pretty, successful dentist girlfriend. Brenda was filled with jealousy. If she couldn't have him, no one else could either. This love triangle would quickly turn tragic and make her the 9th woman to appear on the FBI's most wanted list. Stalking, a hitman, and an escape to Mexico. That's coming up on Ladies Love Crime. Brenda was one of 5 children and the only daughter of working-class immigrants. Her father moved the family from Mexico to Texas the year she was born, hoping to make a better life for his family. He became a construction worker. Her mother worked at the post office and cleaned houses. Brenda was described as being an excellent student, and all the teachers loved her. Like her parents, she was hardworking. After school, she would stop by one of her 2 part-time jobs. Brenda wanted more out of life, though. She dreamed of going to college and hopefully going to medical school. But with no money, Brenda ended up living at home. She worked as a dental assistant. Eventually, Brenda left home and went to live with a friend. She would sometimes hit the town with her friends. Although she didn't wear designer labels, men still flocked to her. She wasn't some wild party animal that hooked up with any guy she met, though. Her brother described her as being selective about men, saying that she drank very little and didn't act flirty. In fact, once she even took her brothers with her when she went on a date. Eventually, Brenda tried online dating, and one day she would come across a man that she just had to swipe right on. He had short black hair, a lean build, and a bright smile. Even better, he was successful. He graduated from Stanford Medical School the previous year and had just moved to Dallas to complete his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Lucky for Brenda, Ricky swiped right too. Little did she know he would forever change the trajectory of her life. Ricky wasn't just good on paper, he was actually a nice person. A patient described him as having a bedside manner that was, quote, second to none. He was quiet and described by Brenda's brother as introverted. The two shared a similar upbringing. She came from a lower income community in Dallas, while Ricky grew up in a single wide trailer in Northern California. When the two met, he was still finishing up his divorce back home in California. But that didn't matter to Brenda. She had found her Prince charming. She no longer was just a girl from a working-class family. Now she was a doctor's girlfriend. The two had their first date at a Jennifer Lopez concert in August of 2012. 3 months later, they were living together. Out of her friend's spare bedroom and into an upscale apartment in Dallas. She introduced Ricky to her parents and everything seemed great. In fact, the following April, Brenda boasted about Ricky on her Facebook, saying, quote, "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we've shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." But things weren't so great after all. 2 months later, she was pregnant. They decided she should get an abortion. She didn't tell anyone, even her family. After Brenda was arrested, police learned that she wasn't okay with the abortion. In fact, she wrote her woes on her notes app on her phone. She indicated that she was upset, but she knew the two of them would become parents again one day. That fall, Brenda went to school to be a dental hygienist and was working part-time as a dental assistant. Ricky had given her a promise ring. They got a new 2-bedroom apartment. Brenda could almost hear the wedding bells. But less than a year later, in August of 2014, it all fell apart. The couple broke up and he told her to move out. She spiraled, eventually dropping out of school. Brenda wasn't ready to let him go, though. She signed up for the same salsa dancing class that he did. Ricky didn't know how she knew about it, but nevertheless, he stayed for class. This should have been a red flag, but Ricky just didn't seem to notice. They started meeting up to practice dancing, and then boom, they were back together like nothing had happened. As Ricky would later say, "We reintroduced each other into one another's lives, and we decided to give our relationship another try." By this time, Brenda was living in an apartment just 1 mile from his place. She stayed there by herself, but he did help her pay some bills, even her cell phone. Their break seemed to be just a hiccup. Brenda's father says he asked Ricky about his intentions with Brenda, to which Ricky said he had, quote, good intentions. Brenda may have dropped out of school, but she was about to get her MRS degree, and she was pretty happy about it. The following year, in February 2015, Ricky called it quits again, this time for good. Just like that, their 3-year relationship was done. However, Brenda didn't feel the same way. He remained friends with her. She remained obsessed with him. Nothing was going to come between her and Ricky. Nothing. By this time, Ricky was 38 and was an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. He also had a new girlfriend, Kendra Hatcher. She was pretty. She was a dentist. She was also loathed by Brenda. So much so that she began stalking Ricky. At first, she would just show up places where Ricky was, which he passed off as coincidence. But Brenda went even further. Brenda had access to Ricky's email and iCloud password, so she knew everything he was thinking, writing, and reading. Better yet, she had a tracking app on his phone, so she always knew where he was. Kendra's Facebook page was public, so all the pictures of the new couple's romance were available, allowing Brenda to see photos of the expensive trips that they were going on that she never got to enjoy with Ricky. Brenda saw how Kendra spent time building churches, working for Habitat for Humanity, and providing free dental work to children in Ecuador. It was a lot to take, and Brenda was documenting every minute of it. She had screenshots of text messages between the couple, as well as their travel plans. Brenda even went on a date with the guy and had him drive her to Kendra's place so she could spy on her. Kendra and Ricky's romance was too perfect. It looked like a cheesy montage from a Hallmark movie. There were trips galore and fancy dinners and cutesy-wootsy selfies and tandem dual bicycle rides. Getting dumped by Ricky was like a stab in the heart to Brenda, but this barf-fest romance was like someone was slowly twisting it in deeper and deeper. Meanwhile, Brenda remained friends with Ricky. They stayed in contact and exchanged texts and calls. Brenda even once gave him a ride to work when his car was in the shop. It's like Brenda was being a girlfriend, but Kendra was getting all the attention and gifts. Ricky and Kendra were in a dangerous love triangle with Brenda and didn't even realize it. Little did they know, Brenda was planning to put an end to it for good. But for that to happen, someone would have to die. Brenda's hatred continued to escalate to the point that others around her knew something was wrong with her. She let her intention slip when talking to a friend from high school. She asked him if he knew anyone who could hurt someone. Shocked, he told her to drop it. The next person to catch wind of Brenda's plan was her roommate, Jennifer. Shortly after moving in, Jennifer began to see Brenda's jealous side. All she talked about was Ricky and Kendra, so much so that Jennifer did whatever she could not to go home after work. Brenda even offered her drugs and a car if she helped with her maniacal plan, which included using a bat to beat Ricky into a coma. Kendra was to be killed as well, either by beating or by stabbing her with a drug-filled needle. Jennifer decided this was too freaky and moved out. A mutual friend named Crystal quickly moved into the empty bedroom. She was a single mother who only made $11 an hour. Crystal looked up to Brenda, thinking she had it together. Brenda had a nice place and nice things, and as she said, she looked like she would be a nice friend. Brenda must have picked up on the admiration, and she used it to her advantage. She groomed her for her plot. She bought Crystal dinners and began telling her story of heartbreak. Within 2 weeks, Brenda and Crystal were planning to murder Kendra. But Crystal's payout wasn't large, as she was only offered $500. The pair began following Kendra everywhere she went. But since these gals didn't know anything about guns, they began cruising the streets of Crystal's neighborhood, looking for someone that could help them. Suddenly, they found a man named Christopher Love. This guy definitely looked like a killer. He was tall, covered in tattoos. One had bullet holes, an AK-47, and the words, "One-Man Army." He had a record of assault and robbery and had been telling people he wanted to start a prostitution ring. All he needed for his pimp dream to come true was some seed money. And then along came Brenda. She wooed him with a story about being connected to a drug cartel and offered to pay him around $3,000 in drugs and cash. They began to prepare for the murder, but their plans would soon be sped up. Ricky emailed Brenda he was leaving town. He accepted a new job, and he and Kendra would be moving to Sacramento. He even asked her if she knew anyone who would buy his furniture. Ouch. Brenda was put in her place. A friend is all she was. Brenda read his text messages, so she probably already knew he was moving. She likely also knew that after just 3 months of dating, the couple was talking about marriage and even setting up a wedding fund. It was now or never. If she waited any longer, he would be married and in a new state. They had a hitman in Christopher and a getaway driver in Crystal. All they needed was a car. Brenda took care of that. She threatened a friend of hers that she would get him deported unless he gave her his Jeep. Like that, they had a car. On September 2nd, 2015, Crystal drove Brenda to the library to study for her exams. It seemed like a perfect alibi. Crystal then took off with Christopher, and they spent the day following Kendra around town. During this day of murder for hire, Crystal still needed to pick her son up from school, so she took Christopher back to his apartment, ran over to pick up her son, went through the Sonic drive-thru, got him some food, and then dropped her son off with her grandmother. She swung back around, picked Christopher up from his apartment, and then they headed over to Kendra's job. Kendra left early that evening, and they assumed that she was headed home. They lost her in traffic, and so they went straight to the parking garage at her luxury apartment. Kendra stopped by a friend's house first to borrow a camera. Her and Ricky were headed to Cancun for the weekend, and of course, she would need to document every minute of it with pictures. The killers got to the parking garage early and lied in waiting. Christopher hid in the back seat. Kendra pulled in and parked. As she got out of her car, Christopher walked up and shot her in the head. Another person in the garage at the time says when Kendra screamed, it was, quote, more like an animal, not like a human. Christopher jumped back in the car and Crystal peeled out, fleeing the scene as fast as possible. Brenda hitched a ride with a friend to Chili's after studying, where she was hanging out, having a good time when Kendra was shot in cold blood. At 35 years old, Kendra was dead, left lying on the floor of a parking garage. Ricky texted Brenda the morning after Kendra's murder. Brenda even offered to come bring him groceries. He suspected nothing. Instead, he found Brenda to be compassionate and understanding. Police began putting the pieces of the shooting together. Surveillance footage from the parking garage led police to the gunman, Christopher, the getaway driver, Crystal, and the jealous ex-girlfriend, Brenda. Detectives questioned all three in just a few days after the murder. Brenda denied any involvement. She provided receipts of the restaurant she was at during the time of the murder and claimed that she really knew nothing about Kendra. She even acted like her and Ricky were never that serious. Pretty soon, police found the gun in Christopher's car. Crystal caved and spilled the beans on the whole plot. By now, Brenda had skipped town. She took off to Mexico, where she had citizenship. While Brenda was on the run, her mother spoke out on her daughter's situation, saying, quote, Brenda is a beautiful and very Christian person. She's a good woman. She has the best family values and is not the jealous type at all. Seems like her mother really didn't know her daughter. Texas launched a large-scale search for Brenda covering 4 states. Meanwhile, Brenda was hanging out in Mexico City. She remained a fugitive for 6 months. The press release for her arrest read, DelGado is suspected of hiring 2 alleged co-conspirators to facilitate the murder. Both co-conspirators have been arrested and are currently in custody. A $100,000 reward was offered, and people were advised not to approach her because she was dangerous. Finally, the FBI put her on their most wanted list. She was found 2 days later inside a home where she surrendered peacefully. She waited in a jail in Mexico City until an extradition process could be worked out with the U.S. The trial kicked off in the summer of 2018. Over the course of 5 days, jurors would hear the sordid tale of jealousy, obsession, and conspiracy. The getaway driver, Crystal, testified against DelGado in exchange for a plea deal. DelGado's defense attorney asked her, as a mother, you didn't care one bit about taking somebody else's child from them, did you? She said, I didn't think about it at the time. Brenda's cousin even testified against her at trial, saying she offered him $2,000 to whack Kendra. There was plenty of evidence to convict her. Prosecutors mapped out the locations of Brenda, Christopher, and Crystal's location during the day of the murder. Jurors saw their locations and movements. Jurors heard testimony about how Brenda called Crystal close to when the murder took place. They also heard how a canine sniffed his way into finding the murder weapon in Christopher's ashtray. There wasn't much the defense could do to refute the case. In fact, they only called one witness to testify, and that was only on the mobile devices used by Brenda. The jury deliberated for less than 20 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. Those in the courtroom say that Brenda showed no emotion when she heard the verdict. Kendra's family had no forgiveness to offer. After the verdict, her mother said, "You could have never measured up to the woman my daughter Kendra Hatcher was. You are the root of all evil. You and the pathetic two you had help you." During sentencing, Kendra's family read victim impact statements. Kendra's sister told Brenda, "You will go down as one of the most hated women in Dallas. No matter how envious you were of any human being, it does not give you the right to destroy lives. Brenda, you are disgusting. I hope you rot in hell." Brenda was sentenced to life in prison. The death penalty was never an option for her. She fled to Mexico where she was a citizen, and as a result, Mexico offered to extradite her to the U.S. only if they took the death penalty off the table. Now, at the age of 36, Brenda would spend the rest of her life behind bars for her act of ruthless revenge and jealousy. Ricky moved back home to California where he works at the Roseville Medical Center. He has not talked about the murder since. Brenda is incarcerated at William P. Hobby Unit in Marlin Falls County. She appealed her conviction, asserting that her right to due process was violated and that she wasn't denied the opportunity to present certain evidence in her trial. In February 2022, the state's highest criminal court denied her appeal. Christopher was sentenced to death. He is currently awaiting his execution at the Allen B. Polunsky facility in Texas. He is set to die by lethal injection. Crystal was sentenced to 35 years in prison. She is incarcerated at the Christina Melton Crane facility and will be eligible for parole in the year 2033. So there's a couple takeaways here. Brenda was obviously a stalker and had all sorts of information on Ricky, but Kendra kept posting about their life. It gave more access to where she was at, what she was doing, and it helped drive the jealousy that fueled Brenda into killing her. It's not her fault that Brenda was a psycho, but we should all be very cautious of what we post. There's always crazy people out there, and they will use whatever they can find on you to hunt you down. There is no need to give people a digital blueprint of all your activities. It's like drawing a map to right where you'll be so they can come and hurt you if they want to. In this day of complete and total transparency and everybody sharing everything online, be cautious. Nutbags are all over the place. Second, people in dire financial straits are easy to manipulate. Crystal was a single mother, didn't have much money, and was desperate for more cash, so that made her more malleable to what Brenda wanted her to do. And that leads me to my final point. Crystal only knew Brenda for 2 weeks before she accepted $500 to kill another human being. Keep this in mind. There is always someone out there who is just 2 weeks and $500 away from being willing and able to kill you.